our next conversation at IGF 2024 is going to be about quantum technologies. There's so much buzz around it. Could it be a game changer in the fight against climate change? Now, we're constantly hearing about game changers, aren't we, in this area? Overused phrase. But you know what? Quantum technologies, they might just be the thing that we're looking out for. Do you want to find out more? Well, I've got some very cool guests here in the studio with me. Maragkou is VP Product and Partnerships for Riverlane, and Ilyas Khan, KSG, is Chief Product Officer at Quantinuum, and they're both working in this area of quantum technology and quantum computing in Cambridge, as it happens, I think both of you, in the UK. So I'm going to start with Ilyas Khan, if I may. Give us a very quick Economics 101, if you like, on what is quantum computing and why should we take it so seriously, Ilyas?
Yeah, so maybe a minute on quantum and 30 seconds on why. So when the computers that we use today, these things were first conceived of in the 30s by Alan Turing, the use of the word computer was actually typically a woman, typically with a pencil, and typically writing things down. And the idea that you could use something called first-order logic, it doesn't matter whether you know what that means or not, but it is a contrived system of ways of reasoning that human beings came up with. If this, then that. If not, then not. Using these constructs, we then started to build these machines that took advantage of differences between a switch being on and off, and that became a computer. Nothing more, nothing less. So it's contrived. It works very well in things like remembering and adding up and multiplying. But that's pretty much its limit. And we, of course, as human beings, have expanded what we can and can't do with them. So that's a classical computer. But it turns out that nature, DNA, RNA, photovoltaic and photosynthesis for plants, the way in which the world works, the enormity of the universe, is governed by the laws of quantum mechanics. So a quantum computer is a computer that uses the laws of quantum mechanics in order to compute. Now the why, so I think I was slightly less than a minute on that, but now the why it matters. Well, we shift radically the bounds of what can and cannot be done. I'll just give you two examples. And these things are very widely understood. For example, India has a quantum technologies program. Most governments, most countries of consequence have a single technology quantum program. Why does it matter? So for example, if we were to create a new material to solve for Alzheimer's, and this is something that we've been trying to do as humanity for decades, and we have not been able to do it, a quantum computer allows us to do it. And from a climate standpoint, something which is very, very important, carbon sequestration. There may be some experts listening here, but this is for 70 years, something that we have not done. And the likelihood is within the next 3 to 7 years, this will be solved. Carbon sequestration is huge.
Yeah, and we've kind of working on it, but not very cost effectively. And we'll talk about that in a minute or two, Ilyas. But first, we must tell everybody that quantum computing has a huge amount of potential, but it's not quite there as a practical tool yet. So, Maria, I just want you to talk us through where we're at. When do you think we can actually have the promise of quantum working to deal with practical problems?
So, as Ilyas said, quantum computers can really help us solve problems that are intractable today with classical computers. So we have quantum systems now, but they are not at the scale that they need to be able to solve these intractable problems. Again, quantum computers are amazing because they take advantage of the laws of quantum mechanics, but this means that the components they are built on, which they are called qubits, quantum bits, they are also very sensitive to the environment. So they are not as reliable yet as we want them to be able to carry out logic and logical computations. So first of all, these qubits, they have to be many of them. They have to be reliable. So this is one challenge that Ilyas and his team are working on, and many other companies. On top of that, there is a layer that we have to add, and we have to make them reliable. This is what Riverlane is doing. We are building a component that corrects them real time. So then on top of that, we can build logic. And logic means algorithms. So there is a lot of work happening on the algorithm side, developing the algorithms that can really help solve humanity's greatest problems.
Okay, you haven't given me an answer to the when.
The when. So the first...
Maybe that's
so
unfair to ask you.
I'm not here to predict the future. I don't want to give you a date. At the moment, everything we can do on a quantum computer, more or less, we can simulate classically. The first milestone that we can reach, and I think the ecosystem generally agrees this can be done within the next 2 years, is to be able to go beyond that. So have machines that can sustain a lot of quantum operations and can solve problems that are not at the moment solvable on a classical quantum computer. I would say this is the first inflection point.
So problems that are not at the moment solvable on a classical computer. So then it's worth all the effort to release this technology. For instance, in the climate crisis.
Problems that cannot be simulated at the moment.
Cannot be simulated, okay. So in terms of the climate crisis, Ilyas, you mentioned carbon sequestration. Tell us a bit more about that and tell us what else it could help us with. Energy management systems, predictions?
Well, not surprisingly, Nisha, the reason why governments are focused on quantum is based on two issues. One is human longevity and health, and the other is climate change. There's an enormous amount of work going on. I'll give you 3 examples that hopefully answer your question and perhaps supplement also the timing issue. So typically in carbon sequestration, we are concerned with doing something that literally has not been done before. It has not been done. It's not that it's done inefficiently, it has not been done. We capture carbon and we store it very badly, but that is not the same as sequestration.
Okay, so what is sequestration?
So carbon sequestration is a way of taking carbon and treating it in the way that plants and other natural things treat it, which is absorb it back safely so that it is not a danger to what we as human beings perceive as hydrocarbon extractive industry emanations. Now, we ourselves, we as human beings, are very bad at taking in carbon and using it properly, although we ourselves are based on carbon. So carbon sequestration using I'll use a technical word, metallic frameworks, and these are porous polymers, is a solution. It's been known for many decades. And creating that solution, now to answer your question, Nisha, more and more companies have decided that the only way to do that is through a quantum computer. And with respect to what Maria said, it is now likely that within the next 2 to 3 years, the first metallic organic frameworks will be created that will sequester carbon. A best example is Total. You can go on their website and there's a fulsome explanation. The other end of the spectrum is batteries. So both hydrogen fuel cells as well as battery storage. And here, Airbus has flipped from classical to quantum. They've decided that battery storage and hydrogen fuel cells can only be created using quantum. And lastly, just my favorite, photosynthesis. How do we effectively convert light into energy and take away the weight of reliance on hydrocarbon? The likelihood is that before the end of this decade, we will have actual photovoltaic processes which do the job we need them to do.
So there's a lot of promise, clearly. But will we have solutions in time? And I'm going to put you the same question, but slightly differently to you, Maria, which is the climate crisis. Well, you can't overstate the urgency, really, that faces us now. We're living with it. Is quantum computing going to be able to come up with meaningful solutions to a meaningful timeline?
So I agree with you 100%. Climate change is a massive problem, and therefore we have to solve it now, right? We have to use any means possible that we have now at our disposal to try to find a solution to it. And of course, it's a multifaceted problem. Climate change, and based on the examples, for example, that Ilyas mentioned, these are just a few examples that adhere to the problem, and there are many, many more. So my stance is we should solve it now with any means possible. And obviously, quantum computing is one of these means that the promise is massive, like we are saying, and we should keep developing, we should keep investing, we should keep developing the technology to be able to make the most out of it.
So, Ilyas, I'm getting the impression that the work in quantum computing is not just happening in labs, it's not just happening in startups, but it's happening in industry. You mentioned Total, you mentioned Airbus. Tell us more about that.
Well, thank you. Yes, I mean, 3 very great Indian business leaders, Satya Nadella, Sundar Pichai, and Arvind at IBM. These 3 leaders are on the record with respect to climate change, with respect to use of quantum computers. My company is not an advertorial, we're the largest quantum computing company in the world, and our clients are all the people that I've mentioned before. This is no longer a lab. The tipping point issue was probably 2 years ago, and I think the point that Maria made is within less than 24 months, and the likelihood is less than 12 months, the use of quantum computers in condensed matter. So condensed matter physics is the base by which everything we've described can be done, will be achieved during this next 12 months. I'd encourage you to think of looking at what Satya has said. There's a wonderful video from Ignite last year.
Okay, so how can we make sure that the benefits of these technologies will be equitably shared, Maria? I can see both of you are nodding your heads, that that India will benefit, that the regions of the world will benefit, the places that are most being affected by the climate crisis. Do we need to be starting to think about governance structures at this stage, or what?
So the truth is, we've seen this before. We've seen technologies being deployed where the societal benefits, the financial benefits, the policy implications were merely an afterthought. We saw it happen with GMOs, we saw it happening with AI. So the quantum industry has taken notice, and we know that. We know this has happened, and we definitely want to avoid it. Quantum computing can absolutely change the world, but we have to develop in a way that is sustainable, like as you said, that the merits and the benefits that can come from quantum computing can be spread across society in the best way possible. I dare say that this has already started, and I know Ilyas feels very strong about that.
Yeah, so Ilyas, what can be done to make sure that, the poor world doesn't lose out, really, to put it very bluntly?
It takes a village, right, to do anything meaningful. I have just a simple 2-pointer for this, a very inadequate answer. From a personal standpoint, I open source something called Ticket. It doesn't matter what Ticket is. There's 30 million users. The vast majority of them are in what we call the global south. I hate that term. And India is a leader.
But why do you hate that term?
Because
this is a digression, but why?
No, I think there's unfortunately during the 80s, 90s, and maybe even in the early noughties, the use of that word became politicized, and it's slightly derogatory because middle-aged white men typically use it when they're trying to be politically correct. It's not about woke. However, I think there's a better terminology. And I think the better terminology is the new world. And I think the majority of people in this world are people that look like you and I and sound like you and I. And I think that that's really important. But the second more practical point, so one was open sourcing, which didn't exist in the world that Maria was talking about, and this is now possible. The second element is I think that large organizations have to be accountable to the places they operate. India, China, Bangladesh, Nigeria. And those countries can make sure that a quantum computer is local to their needs and not accessed through these very, very rigorously profit-wrenching sources that we call the cloud.
So, that's a big and controversial point you made there. We're at the point where quantum computing is possibly just before liftoff. It's not already upon us. There's still time to change its governance. There's still time to roll up your sleeves and get involved. So I'm going to ask you both, what is your message to business people, policy makers, interesting citizens in India and the new world or the global south or whatever you want to call it, who may be listening to our conversation? Maria.
As Ilyas said, it does take a village, so it is not just the quantum ecosystem that needs to develop a machine that will then be delivered to the world. We need to bring all the stakeholders together, also going back to your question about responsible quantum computing. So the governments need to come together, the quantum ecosystem, so the developers need to come together, the industry needs to come together, so then we can develop them in the right way possible to solve these intractable problems. The industry, my message always is, people who work in the various verticals, in pharma, in materials discovery, in aviation, get involved with quantum computing sooner than later, so then you can really make the most of it. With quantum computing, we do have a chance to revolutionize the way we are thinking about computation. It doesn't need to be as simple as, this is my workflow, going from designing a molecule to a trial and then deploying a drug. We can take all this workflow, rethink it, and improve it in an incredible way. So the sooner we all get together, the better.
Look, I care about India, so I'm going to put this message for India, never mind anybody else. Forget about Gen AI. Don't worry about missing that boat. You haven't missed it. We haven't missed it. It is opaque. It lacks transparency. Next Gen AI will be powered by quantum. That is my only message right now. Focus on what actually matters.
Ilyas Khan, Maria Maragkou, thank you so much for joining us at IGF 2024.